And first, let me tell you about what today is astrologically, and it's going to tie in to the lecture, um, but sort of globally, let me tell you. So there's a planet called Uranus. Everybody knows Uranus. And Uranus is a planet that rules chaos, independence, spontaneity, creativity, sudden changes. So it rules hurricanes, tornadoes. Think of that kind of energy. It's very, can be very destructive, and all creative energy is destructive energy because you need to destroy something before you can create. So this is sort of the energy. So all planets at some point during their cycle, and you've all probably have heard of Mercury retrograde because that's sort of the most common one in sort of literature, but all planets have these phases that they go retrograde. And what that means is if you're looking through a telescope, it appears to be going backwards. And what this does in the cosmos and in us, because we're a microcosm of the bigger universe, is it makes certain things in our life either appear to be at a standstill, stop suddenly, again, like the virus, our lives stopped. And now that it's going direct, starting today for the next, I think, 5 or 6 months, I'm not sure when the next retrograde is, things are going to move up, speed up, appear to go faster. So I'll just use the vaccine. Perhaps the vaccine has been sort of slow, people are standing in line, there is no real cohesive system of administration, and now maybe all of a sudden things start to roll and roll out and people start getting the first and their second shots and things. So that's like an example. Individually, in each person's life, this energy is going to show up. Obviously, in the astrology chart, where you have Aquarius, where you have Uranus, that's specifically going to be your area of this energy and this momentum. But what we're going to see sort of globally is this energy of movement, of sudden, of chaos, of creation, of movement forward. Maybe meteorologically we get more storms, things like that. So we can extrapolate the information to anything. Now, and this is what's important about death, is we need to understand birth, and that's the lecture today, and I'll get to my theory in a minute, but this is so relevant. In every religion, in every tradition, in every philosophy, there is always, mythologically, I speak a lot about myths since I'm Jungian, there's a creator energy. So I want you to understand, regardless of your belief system, regardless of your religious beliefs, okay, try to understand not only in your religion, but so to speak, the energy of the energy of sort of God. Okay, so let's call Uranus God. Maybe that helps. I don't really like that word. I like energy or universe better, or in my case, Akashic Records, but think of it like a God energy. When we think of God, when we think of an energy like God, we don't think of doing anything. We think of God as a being, and this is how he's referred to, right? Jesus was the man, if we're going to use the Judeo-Christian language. Jesus was the man who did and lived and was in the body. But God itself is this supreme being that kind of just blankets everything and doesn't really do anything. He's just a presence that's omnipotent and omniscient and just there, okay? Uranus in Greek mythology is that same energy. It is just a sky god, and in mythology you're going to oftentimes get sky gods that are prevalent in mythology. And in a philosophy that I really love a lot is called Sankhya philosophy, because I studied Ayurveda. This is not necessarily Hindu, but it's one of the many philosophies to explain, I guess, Hinduism or Ayurvedic medicine. And you all know this word, Om. So when you go Om, and if you go Om in your body, you're going to feel a vibration. Om, in this philosophy called Sankhya philosophy, like God, like Uranus, like the creator, is just a sound. And if you read the Bible speaks about God speaking the word, and then the earth was created in the 7 days that followed, right? This is the story of every single world, of every single myth, of every single religion. Creator God, and this is the importance, because this is what's going to lead to birth and then death, which is what the class is about. Every single God that's just Om, that's just blanketed consciousness, that's just hanging out, doing its thing, the sky, is intact. And I mentioned this, I think, the other day in class, and I don't have that particular picture, but on Tuesday I'll show it to you. I have a whole theory of relationships and why I ask couples, how did you meet? That's the sort of blanket of union. And the crack in the egg is, what was your first fight? And our first fight in a relationship will tell you everything as a therapist, according to my theory, what you need to know about how the relationship will end, how the relationship will break apart, and of course, as a therapist, how to heal the relationship. But it starts with a union. Two people meet, okay? Union is intact. Same as you and your mother. You and your mother in the womb are intact. When the birth process happens, that's the break in the egg. So this is you at a level of birth. Your relationship at a level of birth, the first fight is sort of the birth. Same goes to the heavens and how all of this was created, how all of us ended up here. We have to go to sort of the sky God or the creator energy to know what the crack in the egg, and this is something, a motif we see in mythology a lot, is the crack in the egg. But what this meant was God, this God presence, this universal energy, this cosmic consciousness, what Jung calls the personal or the cosmic consciousness in terms of, this intact space that we all sort of connect to get symbol and myth and story and why we're all connected to these colors or symbols and so forth, is intact. And this is what I need you to understand. The minute that energy wants to experience itself, okay, God wanted to experience himself, so he created the earth in 7 days, animals and the forest and the land and the humans. The act of creation, the act of doing something is a birth, okay? When you are just at peace, doing nothing, being lazy, you're kind of in that what's called sattvic energy. You're in this energy of just being like God. But when you get up to do, cook, walk, run, get dressed, then you're in a creation mode. So it's very important to understand these two energies. First is the sort of blanket God being, and then the doing, okay? Every single myth, every single religion has this distinction. We, because we are part of the greater cosmos, also have this energy. So when you were in union with your mother, you were like that God energy. You were just union. You were just unified. You were not doing, you were being. The moment of your birth, when you come out, either C-section or the birth canal, you are doing. And I mentioned on Tuesday that the energy of your birth is directly related to how you are going to die throughout your life. And we have something called skinny cows, it's my term for the theory, which are small little deaths that we have every single 7 years. Now we have other small deaths too. Beginnings and endings are constantly happening. When you go from middle school to high school, that's a death. It may not be a skinny cow or a Saturn cycle, but we're constantly in this death rebirth process. This is the essence of our existence in this lifetime. If we do not learn how to die, we will actually suffer at our final death, which is the spirit leaving the physical body, what we all call death. In this field, because people seek therapy when they're having skinny cows or these death experiences, we are like gods of transition. We help people transition. And I mentioned death doulas and I mentioned hospice nurses and palliative care on Tuesday. These are people that have dedicated their life to help people transition. We unknowingly, part of what you're getting yourself into in this field is to help people transition. You might already do this with your friends and family. And like I say, most of us are sort of in a therapy role. I was thrown in as the therapist to my mother at a very young age. No surprise, I end up being a therapist. Michelle once shared with us a cousin that she has that I think, Michelle, you said was being born, raised Muslim or something. And when she comes with you, you paint her nails and you give her makeup. That's a transition, short-lived, a few hours while she's at her house. And then you transition her back to her quote unquote normal life. We, all of us in this field at some root are in charge of transitions with our friends, our family, money, whatever it is. We have a natural tendency and attraction to this role. So we have to understand what people are going through in terms of death cycles when they come to us. But we first subconsciously have to understand, or at least this is how I work and why I wrote this theory, understand the original sort of first transition, which is leaving our first transition, and I'll just give you a sort of soul lesson, and you choose to believe or not, it doesn't matter to me. According to spiritual literature, the soul picks the vibration of mom and dad. So your parents, my son doesn't believe this, but you pick your parents. Maybe you don't want to think of it that way, the way he does, but the soul vibrates and says, oh, I like that womb. I like that energy. I'm going to be in there. Okay, so that's at the soul level. The soul chooses the womb and decides to enter the womb, and hence mom is now pregnant. Okay. So this is the first break, so to speak. The first, you leave the cosmic consciousness, you leave God, you leave heaven, whatever word you like, and you enter. So that's sort of like your first fissure, your first birth, death process. It's leaving heaven to enter. And you're going to see that in my diagram in a minute. To enter the womb. While you're in the womb, you're learning things about the earthly world, one of which is specifically how love should be, what love should look like. We all have a distorted definition of love. We do not know real love. We forgot what real love is, which is union with God, union with the cosmos, the minute we decide to incarnate in the earthly form. Okay? So what you feel in the womb is a human version of love, a distorted version of love, and why in my theory I say parents cannot love you unconditionally. Your parents cannot love you unconditionally because they themselves are human and are flawed and have desires and requirements and needs that you come to fulfill. Okay, so the only sort of true universal love that exists is the union between you and your creator, you and the heavens, you and God, you and yourself. If you're Hindu, you believe God lives within you. And that's the whole spiritual journey and self-love and everything that we hear nowadays, okay? So that's the first sort of break, or the first birth. Obviously, you can't ask your client, so how was it when you left heaven? Obviously, they don't know. So the next best thing is, how was your conception? If your parents remember when they conceived you, that is phenomenal information to have. So all of you go call your parents today and go, hey, Dad, Mom, how was it when I was conceived? If they remember, great. Sam, obviously the parents know because they wanted her so badly and they tried and tried and tried. She knows her conception story. Most clients don't know their conception story. So we go to the third best thing, which is the birth. Now, look at what I'm doing here. We're leaving a perfect union. We're splitting. There's a death. We leave heaven. We enter the physical form in the womb. There's a birth. Okay? We don't remember that process because we're not existing. Conception. There's a union. Mom and dad are together. An egg drops and is fertilized. There is a death and a rebirth. You are now born. You don't remember that one? The next best thing is the birth. You are in union with your mother in the womb. There is a break, a crack. You're born. There is a physical birth of your body. So we can go to any of these and get information about how we're going to die throughout our life, and more importantly, how we have to learn how to die, which is what our job is with our clients. Being a death doula, being Hecate, god of transitions, this is our role as a therapist when people come in crisis, dying because they're leaving an old transition into a new. If you don't know your birth, then the next thing you go to is what I call the 0 to 7. The 0 to 7 is where you get your actual story. You were there, you know who the players were, you know what your trauma was, you went to school, a baby was born in the family, your parents got divorced, whatever your story, that is then the next union, which is you with your family, and you have your first trauma. This in the astrology chart would be called Saturn, and wherever you have Saturn is where you're going to have mini deaths, or what I call the skinny cows, throughout your lifetime. That is what's going to teach you how to die, so that when you finally leave this world of physical form, you could die appropriately. Okay, so it doesn't matter where along the lines you get the story. The point is the client needs to tell you a story, because that's the story that they're going to repeat, that you are then going to help them rewrite, okay? We are creatures of habits, of cycles, and patterns, every single one of us. So all I do in a session is I go back to the old cycle, I see how they moved into the new cycle, and that gives me all the information I need. I personally like to find out about the birth, because the transition from the union of the womb into the earthly realm of you being a baby individuated, and that is the purpose of dying, that we individuate, that we birth ourselves away from the masses, the family, or whatever it is. That's why it's such a lonely process, because we feel that something's being taken from us, ripped from us, we're detaching from something or someone. That's the process of dying throughout life. And we've all had, all of you are old enough to have had transitions, and all of you are old enough to remember your 7 years, your 0 to 7, and what happened to you. So you all have that information already. If you can get the birth and the conception, even better. Because all it does is confirm, confirm, confirm. Okay. So this is the importance of understanding from a client perspective their birth story, how they came into the world. Bring up my theory. Hold on. Share content. Okay, I shared my screen. Now let me bring up my. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Okay. So you've seen this in the classroom. This is my theory, and it's exactly what I just said. We come from wholeness. I don't care what you believe. God, heaven, mythology, the universe, and it does not matter. Nobody will argue that we come from something, we don't have to know what it is or have a name for it, that is intact. This is the key here. This energy that created us was intact. And we, entering the earth, have created a break, an egg, a break, a fissure that's in the picture that I have in the classroom. From this wholeness, here I use the word conception. We are now conceived. Conception is when we now leave this sort of unencumbered whole energy and we've decided to make a run for the earthly realm. So the first break that we don't remember in our consciousness, now people that do past life regressions or astral travel or work with me may experience their incarnation into the world, and that's something that you could do with, people that do the kind of work that I do. It's not necessary, but it's the first sort of break. So our first break is conception. And see here that is where the subconscious begins in my thought process, in my model, okay? So the first break, the subconscious begins, is the moment you are conceived. The moment you are conceived, and this is super important, the moment you are conceived, you are 50% your mother, 50% your father. I don't care if you don't know your mother, if you don't like your father, if your father died, if your mother ran away. You are 50% mom and dad. And that is the mind that you are going to fight every single day for the rest of your life. It is your parents' pattern, not yours. This is super, super important that you are going to fight the rest of your life. They're not your thoughts. They're their thoughts from the moment of conception. The reason you and me go through death cycles, go through transitions, go through changes, leave home, go to college, have a marriage, have a baby, go bankrupt, whatever it is, whatever your debts are, is so that you can stop being your parents' mind and create your own mind. Birth yourself. This is super, super important. You are not born yourself. This idea that you're your own person and you're free and you don't fit, bullshit. Bullshit. You, like me, like everybody, are trying to break away, move away from what I call the Costco membership into your Nordstrom's. Nordstrom's my favorite store, so I chose Nordstrom. Pick a store that you like. You need to let go of your parents' Costco membership, the way they think, their values, the way they view the world, and go into your own. This is a huge transition, a huge crisis that you cannot do from one day to the next. It takes every 7 years, little bit, for you to start saying, I don't agree with that. I don't believe that. That's not the way I want my marriage to work. That's not the way I want to manage my money. And we slowly inch, if we do the work properly, which is our job as a therapist, inch the client away from their parents' mind and help them develop their own mind, their own value system. So last night I had a client, and I see immediately that she's going to get married. I see her at the wedding. I see the party, all of this. And she doesn't have a boyfriend. And I see the whole wedding. But what I see is that she needs to change her perception about men. So when I enter the energy, I see this like monster, like a big foot, and she's being squeezed, almost like King Kong, how King Kong is holding Jessica Lange at the top of the Empire State Building, like that. And I said to her, what are your views around men, that they're beasts, that they're animals, that they squeeze you dry, that they suck you lifeless? Like, you have this horrible idea about who men are. No wonder you don't have a boyfriend at 25. And she's like, yeah, her mother had all these relationships and horrible. And she goes, I saw my mother go through this. Very common. We see our parents and we assume that to be the truth of the world. And I said to her, girlfriend, you need to change this hardcore. So of course I give her my model and I talk to her about this. I said, that is not, I'm not saying that there aren't men like that exist in the world, but that is not men. I said, you need to change. You cannot live your mother's life. You cannot repeat your mother's cycles of destructive relationships. That isn't the truth, and that isn't what's on your path. Her path was to have one relationship, long-term, live happily ever after. Like, I see this. I said, if you don't make the change in your mind from your mother's pattern to own your pattern, you're going to be screwed. And this is what the death process is in our life. We must detach from our parents' beliefs, from their patterns, from their cycles, from their karma, and move into our own story. This usually happens later on in life. One of the biggest things that we get is something called the nose, and that happens around 18 when kids go to college. So when we go to college, traditional students go to college 18 to 22, they're confronted with multiculturalism, multinationalism, LGBTQ, other ethnicities, things that they may have never been exposed to in their little bubble, which was mom and dad and their little community and their little church and their little friends and their little neighbors. And all of a sudden they're exposed. So we need to be exposed to new ideas and different people and different things so that we can break away and see that our parents, the values that they gave us and the way they chose to live their life is not the end all be all. And this is what this girl has to do. She has to rewrite her narrative around men and relationships so that she indeed can show up at her wedding, which I clearly saw is happening. So all of us have this. Don't think at any point that you are not your parents. Your mind is your parents' mind. Now, all of you are growing and you're older than 18. You're in this process. But this process of death starts at 7. For some kids, unfortunately, it starts much younger. But traditionally, between 0 and 7, we have our first death, our first crisis. For some kids, it's just going to school. The kids used to go at 7 years old to school. Psychologists know that personality development starts at 7. This is a clear, marked fissure in our brain. We now have a personality, an ego, a mask we are choosing to wear to navigate the world. That in itself is a transition, is a death, is a crisis, because we're no longer merged with mommy and daddy at home. Now we're thrust into school. And yes, some kids go earlier, pre-K, nursery. I get all that. I'm giving you the 0 to 7 range so you know that it happens in that phase. So asking the client what happened between 0 and 7 is a very valid question to understand their death, to understand their trauma. If they don't remember their conception story or they don't know their birth story, the next logical question is, tell me about 0 to 7. And you're going to hear. So this morning I had a client and we were talking about rejection. She's an older woman. Her husband died. She's starting to date. She's terrified. And I hear all her language is about adding the guy to her life and seeing him on the outskirts and everything outside, not weaving him into her life. And I said, you know, you're never really going to meet somebody if you have them like an appendage. If they're on the side, you need to bring them in to your life, part of your friends, part of your home, part of your bed, part of your reality. And so we have to pay attention. And as therapists, that's what we do, is we pick up on words. So when your client is recounting a story of what happened to 0 to 7, that's important. So I asked her, I said, close your eyes and tell me the first time you were rejected. And I knew it had to fall between 0 to 7 because that's just the way it worked. And she went to when she was 6 years old. She was rejected by her chorus teacher because she couldn't sing. So these deaths, these traumas are very deeply embedded, whether the client remembers or not, and we prompt them with questions. If we listen to the current story, your client can come at 45 years old with a trauma, with a story, you're fine. You're getting the story of today. I personally like, and I am a psychodynamic therapist, going to the earlier years to find out the origin of it. In my case, I want to know the subconscious from the moment they were conceived and their birth, if they know it. But if not, next best question is what happened 0 to 7, and you're going to get the death story. You're going to get the story of the trauma, of the crisis, in this woman's case, rejection, and go no further. What happened to Adam and Eve? They were rejected. They were thrown out of the Garden of Eden. So, and I know this woman is a Pisces, and me being a Pisces, I know this is part of our myth. Her original rejection, she doesn't know this at the soul, comes from when she was forced to come to earth. Pisces do not want to be on earth. We don't like the earth. We don't like the body. We want to be all things spirit. So I didn't take her there today, but that's really her story. She was expulsed from heaven. She was expulsed like Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. That's in the mythology of Pisces and our psyche. So you can trace your client's story back to the moment that they left heaven, quote unquote, and decided to be conceived. But you don't have to do that kind of work. I'm just telling you because that's the kind of stuff that I do. So I can see her story from even her mythology. So you need to understand what happens 0 to 7 with the client. Why? Because 0 to 7 here, stage 4, is the narrative develops. Your personal myth with your characters, your costumes, your thread of conception story turns into a real life portrayal and becomes the truth, what you think are truth, of what you build your life upon that you will prove over and over again. You were given a story around your birth, around your conception, around your 0 to 7, and come hell or high water, you are going to prove that story true. No one is going to change your mind. But the universe, heaven, God, trauma, crisis, death, whatever you want to call it, comes knocking every 7 years to say that's not true. That's not you. You're not that story. You're not that trauma. And that's how you evolve through life. But in order to have a new birth, you must die in a little bit of that story, of that narrative. Your parents' mind has to die so that you can transition and you can move into who you are, your true authentic self. What I wrote on the board the other day, you move from a self with a lowercase s to a self with a capital S. You are enough. You don't have to do anything. You are enough because you are God's child, because you are the divine, because you are light, whatever language you want. That is the whole process of why we're here. This is the big illusion of and the mystery of life and death. Simply here to use words from Hinduism to remember who you are, that you are God, that you are the light, that you are the spark, that you are divine. Every single death, rebirth story, every single crisis, every single trauma, even the death when you leave the physical body to go back to the spirit world or that consciousness. Some people don't believe that, and that's okay. I'm not trying to change anybody's mind. If you believe that you die, the earth takes the elements of your body and death and consciousness dies, fine. My point is, you go back to union. Even if it's just the elements, the body goes back to the earth. Every single person somehow understands that we are going back to a state of wholeness, of union, even if it's just your elements of your physical body being swallowed by the earth, and hence why we have burials or cremations. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. It's in the Bible. This is in every text. I don't care if you believe in a consciousness after life, not of concern to me. My point is that the entire mystery of life is learning how to die. That's the big secret. Letting go of that original break, that original crisis, that original fissure where we left wholeness that started at conception, then carried on to birth, then carried on to the 0 to 7 when you got your story and your personality. And the rest of your life after 7, all you're doing is trying to come right back home to wholeness. And that only happens officially when you leave the physical body. The whole process of life is learning how to die. That is the importance of this class, because as a therapist, you have to help clients learn how to die. More importantly, and what I care for each of you, is for you to learn how to die. So, I told you on Tuesday, ask your parents about your birth story. Your birth story, in my model, is the third stage of the development of the subconscious. Again, it's just building one on the other, because if we don't know how we left heaven to enter the body and we don't know the conception story, the next best thing is the birth story. Your birth story tells you how you're going to transition into stages of your life. Okay? So I'm going to give you my birth story. My mother and dad were at the movies. My dad goes to buy the ticket. My mom grabs my dad's hand, says, "Don't buy the ticket. I'm in labor." He rushes her to the hospital. They put her in the table. The doctor says, "Hold it." My mother says, "Hold it, tu madre." And I come flying out, and they have to catch me because I almost fall on the floor. That's my birth story. That holds space in my consciousness, whether I like it or not. Your birth story, no matter what you know about it, little or a lot, holds consciousness in your psyche. And you, knowing or unknowing, are going to transition into phases of your life, as will your clients, according to that birth story. They don't know the birth story? Ask them 0 to 7. It's the same thing. I like the birth story. It gives me more criteria, more imagery, more message for my personal way of working. But again, if you know the conception, if you know the birth, if you know the 0 to 7, you're going to get to the information about how to transition. So in my case, I move fast and furious. I don't process. I don't think. I run away. I go. I hit the floor running. This is how I have lived my life. So when my life falls apart, as you all know, I start going to therapy. First time in my life. I don't believe in therapy. I go to therapy. And lo and behold, in the bathroom of the therapist's office is a poster that says, it could have said Francis because it was speaking to me, "There is more to life than increasing its speed." And this is how I have pummeled through life, pummeled through transition. I'm a quick processor. I'm a quick study. I have a quick brain. So, okay, I don't need 50 times or more than, a lot of time to understand a lesson. Great. But I still, like everybody else, have to live the process. And what I wanted to do was not live the process. I didn't want to have an actual birth. I didn't want contractions. I didn't want the slow time of having my mother birth me. I wanted to just pummel my way through to the next stage. So now this death that I just had, a massive death, which was not a Saturn 7-year skinny cow. I told you the other day, you have one, if ever, in your life, what's called a Pluto death, that just kills you, destroys you. Most people aren't even going to have this, but that's what I have. So this is a very different death than a skinny cow. Every 7 years, you're learning something. So what happens is my husband leaves. The day he leaves, I throw away all the furniture. I paint all the walls. I get artwork. I revamp the entire house. A couple months later, I can't sit still because, of course, it's all about speed, speed, speed. And I'm like, I'm getting out of here. I move into an apartment across town. Then I finished that lease 3 months later, and I moved to Pine. Then I moved back to Weston. It was like move. I had to move because my birth story is about movement and action and speed and go and run away and don't confront things. And that was how I was trying to move into this phase of my life that was not going to work. So lo and behold, and this is a belief system, you don't have to believe it, I get cancer again. And this time it's not a little cancer that I just get a lumpectomy, but I need a double mastectomy and I need chemo and I'm on the bed and I can't move. And life slows me the F down. Because I couldn't get there myself, I needed something to just slow me. And I was on a couch for 2 years doing nothing. I couldn't listen to music. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't read a book. It was a miracle that I could get to class and lecture you guys. That's why you guys have saved my life. Nothing. And then COVID hits. And now everything is stopped. So I was going to learn this lesson from a cosmic place no matter what. And I did, and now I have transitioned. And now I'm more patient and more compassionate and slower and more deliberate. And funny enough, if you believe in these things, I meet the ginger who has so many planets in Taurus. Taurus is the slowest sign. Everything is slow. Everything is patient. Then I'm in a relationship that I can't be like I used to be fast, 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 fast. Everything's slow. Everything deliberate. Because in order for us to learn how to die, the big death, okay, the big transition, the one leaving this body, we must change our birth story. And it took being pummeled, destroyed, losing everything for me to learn the lesson to slow down, and there's more to life than increasing its speed. So you have to listen to the client's birth story and or the 0 to 7 to know what they need to change. And your job is to help them transition differently than they normally transition from stage to stage to stage. Now, the older your client is, the more you're going to see the pattern unfold, and the more you're going to identify what it is that you need to help them with switch. Now, of course, if you choose to do death doula, if you choose to do hospice, if you choose to do palliative care, and that's a whole other story, you're going to help them into the final transition. But most of you, like me, if you go into this field, are going to be helping people through their skinny cows. So where do I get this concept of skinny cows? This is what most people are going to have in terms of death. In the Bible, there's a story of Joseph. And Joseph was born the favored son of his father. And all his brothers were jealous. And he had prophetic dreams, and he was the only one allowed to study. He didn't have to work the field. He was the favorite. Okay, so there's his birth story in 0 to 7. Well, his brothers hate him and are jealous and decide that they're going to throw him into a ditch. First, they decide they're going to sell him into, they're going to kill him. They throw him into a ditch and they sell him to slavery. So that's his first sort of death, the transition. I leave home, this perfect place where my parents love me, adore me, and now I'm thrown into a ditch. Every single one of you from 0 to 7 have a loss, have a transition. Your client too. They're thrown into a ditch. A new baby is born and they're dethroned. A grandparent dies and they learn about death. They have to go to first grade and they're like, oh shit, now I have to be a class clown. Some transition. That's the death I speak of, that then they start their new journey individuated away from mom and dad. So Joseph lived this out. Well, he ends up being sold to slavery. He's a slave. I mean, this is a guy who's destined to be king. Okay, so talk about having to come full circle. You are destined to be king. Why? Because the belief is that you are God. You are a representation of God. Whether you believe in God or not, I don't like the word God. I'm just using it so everyone understands. The concept of coming home to your true self, to your authentic self, to not being masked, to being totally accepted by people in your essence, in your truth. That's what I mean by God. So Joseph was destined to be king, okay, as all of you are. And he's thrown into slavery, he's sold. He becomes really good friends with the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh enters into the house. He allows him to enter as a slave into the house. The slaves that are allowed to work in the home are lucky. They're privileged, just like back in the day of slavery. The African Americans that were allowed to be in the home, they didn't have to be in the sun. There's a place of privilege. So he owns this privilege. The Pharaoh's wife accuses him of cheating with her, which was a lie. It's that he rejected her. And the Pharaoh knows it's not true, throws him into a ditch. And he's in that ditch for years and years and years. During that time, he starts developing a skill of prophecy, where he dreams and he knows what the dreams mean. Okay? So he tells some of the people that are in the ditch in the prison with him that he has this gift. And he's like, please tell the Pharaoh, I can interpret dreams, because this was something coveted back in the day, right? So the Pharaoh keeps having this recurring dream, and he doesn't know what it is. And it's a dream of these fat cows eating, these skinny cows eating these big fat cows. So this is where I get my concept of the skinny cow. And the Pharaoh finds out that Joseph knows how to interpret dreams. He pulls him out of the ditch, and he's like, tell me what this dream means. And Joseph says, what the dream is that Egypt is going to have 7 years, okay, so this is for your life and your client's life, of good, fat, healthy cows. After 7 years, the skinny cows are going to come in, and there's going to be famine. So what we need to do is save for a rainy day. Save the grain, save the wheat, store it away for the 7 years of famine, that Egypt and its people don't go hungry. And the Pharaoh loves this so much that he makes Joseph king and puts him in charge of all of the wheat. We have 7 years of fat cows, and we have 7 years. It's not really 7, it's every 7. You only have it for 2 years, 7 years, you die. 2 years of skinny cows. Every time you have a skinny cow phase that happens every 7 years, it is related to the death that you had when you were born, leaving the womb into your earthly body, or at 7, 0 to 7, whatever that story is, repeating at another level. Obviously, if you go to school at 7 and go to first grade, at 45, you're not going to go back. I mean, you may go back to school, university, but you're not going to go back to first grade. It's going to be a theme that is woven. It could be education, it could be a teacher, it could be a position of authority, depending on what your client shares with you. So I have this concept of the skinny cows. And every 7 years, we have a skinny cow. Skinny cow is death. Something in you needs to die, related to your birth story, related to your conception story, related to your 0 to 7 story, all of this that's here. And what you're doing is you're moving away from that Costco membership of mom and dad. You're moving away from the thoughts that they gave you, and you're coming up with your own thoughts, your own values, your own ideals. Are some going to overlap with your mom and dad? Of course. There's going to be family values and spiritual values, in my case, that I'm always going to have, because my parents are extremely familial and extremely spiritual. And that is me in a nutshell. But there's a lot of things, for instance, Trump. I'm not a Republican, and my parents, old hardcore Cubans, are Republicans. So there are going to be values that you're going to move away from. You're not going to die everything. You're not going to kill everything that your parents are and all of the mind, but you're going to move into your own mind. And that's why I have the theory of the good and the bad buckets. The good buckets tend to be the things you like about your parents that don't cause much issue. The bad buckets are the things you dislike, consciously or subconsciously, about your parents that are in you. These are the things that cause you problems. These are the qualities about yourself that you don't like. And it's because you've seen them in your parents and you don't want to be those things. So the subconscious says, oh, I don't like my mother is image-based, like my mom. Let me be the complete opposite, because I have no other way of doing it different. And what did I do? I never wore makeup. I gained weight. I didn't care about my image. I was not going to be my mother. This is the way our psyche interprets these bad qualities. As we go through life with these skinny cows, part of the death process is to go back to that and say, oh, well, I don't need to negate all of image. I do like my body to look pretty and I want to look attractive, but maybe I don't have to go to the extreme of my mother or father's bad bucket or idea about image, and I'm going to formulate my own idea. That's what I mean by membership, which is buy into your parents 100%, and your Nordstrom, which is I'm going to take the things I like from mom and dad, but I'm going to create my own values around things that I believe in. I'm going to live it my way. That is the whole purpose of transition and death in our life, these skinny cow periods. This is when clients are going to show up to the door. Most people do not show up during fat cows. They are hog in heaven. What's that, hog heaven? They're high on the hog, whatever that's called, and they're living life and things are great. They're not knocking on the therapist's door, most likely. It's when the skinny cows hit that they don't know how to transition or what they have to learn to let go of. And so my theory, what I'm trying to teach you is, if you go back to those stories, you go back to those big transitions from heaven to the spirit, deciding they're going to incarnate, if you have access to that information, or the story of conception, when your parents, fissure, the egg and the sperm, creates you, or when you leave remember, it's union, fissure, that's the story, okay, all throughout. Ultimately, to the biggest one, union of body and spirit, spirit and body dematerialize, and your body's in the ground, and if you believe in spirit going back to heaven, then that's the final one. But it's all about union, fissure, whether it's mom and dad having sex and you're the fissure, you're the break. If you know those stories, the birth into the bodily form, into the actual birthing room, then that's where you start. But if not, ask the client, which they will all know, 0 to 7. Then your job is to help them do it differently, not increase life speed every skinny cow like I did. What you want is to help them turn it around, do it different. So if they tend to go to addictions and poor coping, you help them with that. If they tend to spend a lot of money, you help them with that. That's going to give your therapy some framework of what to help the client with. That's what I love about my model, is it tells me what I need to do with the client, for the client. I don't have to invent this. I don't have to pull it out of my head. The story is unfolding and showing me. And the birth story in particular shows me exactly what it is that they need to do differently. The more you learn how to die, the better your final transition out of the earthly body is. Again, whether you believe the elements go back to the earth or that spirit continues its consciousness is up to you. That's the process that we're doing as a therapist. Questions about my model, the death rebirth, any of this? Does this resonate? Does it make sense? I invented this theory, so it's my theory. So it may not resonate with you. And then there's a gazillion others, and we're going to cover Kubler-Ross, and we're going to cover her counterpart, Kessler. Then they have their whole theory of grief and death and dying. This is my theory. It works, but it may not resonate. Any questions or comments about that? No? No one? Does it sound like gibberish? Did I just talk to myself for an hour and a half?
I'm seeing my connection is just what?
Hey, for some reason, it kept coming in. You sounded like an alien for like half the class. I kept having to log out, log back in. I don't know if anyone else had that problem. It was very staticky for most of it.
Yeah, I was having the same thing.
I did not notice that. Well, you're going to hear me repeat this over and over and over and over again.
Yeah,
you're going to hear my spiel, not only in this class, but always, because this is the way I work. This is the therapy model that I created. This is what I wrote the book about. So don't stress out if you miss bits and pieces. But the gist is, we come from some unified source, no matter where down the canal, and there's a break, there's a fissure. In that fissure, that's a death. And our job is to get back to a place of wholeness or union. And that's our job as a therapist.
I'm going to go in there.
Okay. So any questions specifically about this? If you like the model, on my website, dryahia.com, if you go to the podcast link, you can download a workbook. You don't have to buy my book. if you go to my website, you'll see all of this written, all 4 stages of the subconscious development. And of course, in the classroom, the thing I shared on the screen is the poster of how this works. So you can take a picture on Tuesday. But this is sort of the transition. This is what, thank you, Sam. This is what we're experiencing in life. This is the process of death, so to speak. So any questions before we go? The class content is still not up. Oh, let me take attendance. I'm going to stop recording. The class content is still not up. I'll follow up